And now we need a method to prepend. I also need to help you this semester to become a little more self-reliant, to be able to write programs without having to go to a tutor for help with debugging. You're getting ready to enter the workforce where you won't have this help, so you need to learn to write your programs incrementally so that you always know where your mistakes may be, if indeed you have a mistake, to help you to debug. And so the next few programs I am going to write with you and not just present you with a program that's already written, so that you can see how I create a program. So here we have prepend with method. The only thing I've put two things in here. One is our print list method, which we know works. I copied it from another program. And I put the node class in here too. So that's our starting point. I always start with comments in main. I put my algorithm in main. And this is a very simple algorithm. We will start with an empty list. And let's put some items in the list. So maybe we'll put a for loop. So loop 5 times. What will we do each time? Each time we will get an integer, and then we will prepend it. And maybe in my loop I will also output my list, just so that I can see its status every time. So this is going to be the end of my loop, and then at the end I can put a message, and I can output my final list. So this is what I'm going to do in my loop. So again, start with an empty list, loop 5 times, any number of times, but more than 2 probably. Each time get an integer, prepend it, so I'm going to call my method. I'm also going to print it so that every time through I can verify that I have actually put the most current integer into the list. I don't mean I'm going to leave this line there forever. I can certainly comment it out or delete it before I have my final product, but it's there for debugging purposes, and then output my list. Okay, so some of these things are pretty easy to do. Once I know that I have a good algorithm, I then code the comments. I don't have to think through the algorithm again. I just have to code the comments. Okay, how do I start with an empty list? Node head equals null. Okay, I got my empty list. Loop 5 times for int I equals 0, I less than 5. Okay, there's my loop. While I'm down here, I can do my message. Output my final list is a call to my print list. Okay, let's deal with this loop. Get an integer. That means that somewhere I'm going to need a scanner. Let's stick it up here. Okay, get an integer. Probably need a prompt. Followed by getting my integer. Prepend. So I'm going to call my prepend method, and I've learned now that that any method needs to return the head. So head equals prepend. I got to give it the head of the list, and I'm going to give it this integer, and then print my list. Okay, so now I have to write this prepend method. So I'm going to return a node, and it's going to have two parameters, the head and an int. I'll make that an int. We know that the last thing it has to do is return the head. That stops NetBeans from yelling at me that there's no return. While I think about how this works. So the first thing I need to do is make a node that I'm going to add to my list. This is the syntax we've used before, because we've used this constructor. But we have another constructor here. And what this constructor does is it actually allows us not to put null into next, but to put some other node into next. Well, let's go to the whiteboard for a minute. If we have these two nodes pointed to by head and temp, and we want temp to go in front of head because we're trying to prepend, then we want temp's next to point to head. So the second constructor can help us, because when we construct temp, we can make its next point to head, and then the only other thing we have to do then is make head point to temp, and we are done. Maybe the only thing I have to worry about is what happens if head is initially null. then I don't have head pointing to anything. Head is null. I've got temp. I've constructed it with the next pointing to head, but head is null. So what does that mean? It means that temp is then null, and then I want head to point to temp. So that logic works whether head was initially null or not. This means I don't have to even worry about whether head was initially null. What I do have to do is use that second constructor and make my temp a new node with the integer in there. The address would be the address of head. In other words, it'll point to head. Temp's next is going to be head. And now I need to move head to point to temp. And that should be done. Let's check that by running it. Okay, I'm going to enter an integer. I'm going to make it 5. And then my list is 5. Now I'm going to put a 7. And my list is 7 followed by 5. Now I've got an 8. 8, 7, 5. -2. -2, 8, 7, 5. And then the last thing is a 10. 10, -2, 8, 7, 5. So it did always prepend, convince myself that everything's good, so I can take this print list out of my loop, and then I can just put some numbers in here. 23, 56, 89, 2, -1, and then my final list is -1, 2, 89, 56, 23, which is definitely everything in there prepended. Good.